Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for your time today to review the charter school application process in Tennessee. My name is Nate Parker, and I am the Director of Charter Schools for the Tennessee Department of Education. I am joined today by my colleague Judy Spencer, the Senior Director of Choice, and we are looking forward to the opportunity to walk through this process with those of you who are interested in applying to open a charter school in the 2023-2024 school year. Judy, is there anything that you would like to say as we get started here?
Just welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on this important webinar. For those of you who are very interested in launching a charter school, we want to support you through that process. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and we will also have opportunities for questions throughout. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Judy. It's great to see familiar faces and names, but also some new faces and names. A little bit about my background. I worked in charter schools for over a decade as a teacher and as a school leader. So I'm very passionate about this work and excited for this opportunity to speak to you about our charter application process today. As with all the work we do at the department, we like to ground ourselves in our best for all mission for the state of Tennessee, which is setting all students on the path to success. The authorization and operation of new high quality school options for all Tennessee families directly supports this mission. So thank you for your interest in leading this crucial work, serving our Tennessee students, families, and their communities. Our purpose today for this webinar is to increase your knowledge or your comfort with the charter school application process here in Tennessee. We'll work towards this goal by following the agenda posted here. First, I'll provide an overview of the school year 2023-24 charter application and submission procedures. Next, we'll examine the application review process. Then we'll briefly touch on the appeals process, and finally wrap up with an overview of what changes have been made for the fiscal year 22 application round. While there is an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation, please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions throughout. Judy is helping me keep an eye on the questions as they come in, and so please don't hesitate to interrupt and ask questions as they come up. To begin, I have just a quick icebreaker for us to help provide me some context. This is as when I was teaching the classroom, I want to assess students' prior knowledge. So just briefly, if you could assess how you're feeling right now in terms of the knowledge or the comfort level you're bringing in with the Tennessee Charter School application process. And then enter that number into the chat box. So a 1 would be that you are coming in with very little to no knowledge or comfort. A 5, you're an expert, you could take over my job and teach it to everyone, or you're very comfortable with it. It's kind of subjective here, but where would you place yourself on that scale from 1 to 5? It's going to pop in the box real quick.
All right, so far we're seeing 3s to 5s.
I like the use of decimal points. I appreciate the accuracy and precision.
Good.
And Mecca, I'm glad to see on a good day that you'd be a good rival.
Yeah, these are good high numbers. That's great.
Okay. So far I'm seeing a lot of 3s and 4s and some decimals in there. So no 1s or 2s, which tells me a lot of you have already started the process of reviewing the materials on the website or have gone through this process before, and that's great. I'm glad that today won't be the starting point for you. If you are feeling not as confident and you just didn't want to put a 1 or a 2, that's totally fine. I'm going to go through our slides today and provide as much detail as I can, but obviously we're limited with the time that we have to go over such a robust process. So if you have additional questions or concerns following this webinar that weren't addressed, my contact information is located at the end, my email and phone number, and I'm happy to set up additional time to talk through any of the processes with you. So we'll start with talking about, in general, what is the charter school application process and what does that look like in Tennessee for those of you who might be from out of state. So first, it is written into statute what this process looks like, as well as charter commission rule and where you can access those policies and laws are written there. But ultimately, it is an opportunity for sponsors to start a new public charter school in Tennessee, or for schools who are exiting the ASD, the Achievement School District, to apply to their home district. And a sponsor in our terminology is the word we use for the proposed governing body who's filling out the application. So who's actually applying to establish this new public charter school. And there are two kind of main buckets that a sponsor has to fall into in order to qualify as a sponsor. The first is they cannot be a for-profit entity. They cannot be a non-public school, and they cannot be a post-secondary institution who is not regionally accredited. So those three things must be true. And then it also cannot promote the agenda of any religious denomination or religiously affiliated entity. So if your sponsor meets those criteria, then you are able to apply to open up a charter school here in Tennessee. Before you begin the process, it sounds like most of you probably have already started, which is good, or you've already maybe gone through an entire cycle yourself. But we do want to direct you to the resources that are available to you. First and foremost, I recommend reading through the Tennessee Public Charter School Act. That is linked here, but you can always look up the Tennessee Code annotated online. There's a lot of information there, but especially the first few sections of that statute. The first section itself goes over crucial definitions for terms that you might come across. What is an authorizer? What is a sponsor? But it also gives the basis for all the work that we do for the application and the review process. In addition, once you move beyond the actual application process, it talks about elements of charter school compliance and a lot of important information that would be good information to know before you get into the work of charter schooling. You want to make sure you know and understand kind of the basis for what that looks like in Tennessee. Second, there are great resources on our website, and our office is continually working to update and create more guidance, but everything that is on our website right now is current and up to date. So please check that out if you haven't already done so. And then finally, if you haven't yet done so, we definitely recommend reaching out to your authorizer and just checking to see what local guidelines that they may have for applicants. And it doesn't hurt to introduce yourself, especially if they have an existing charter school office already. Get familiar with who works in those offices, who to reach out to with questions or concerns. But also, if it's a district that does not currently operate any charter schools, it would also be really important to reach out to them because they probably don't have a standing charter school office or an employee who does that work all the time. So reaching out and making sure that you know where to submit things, who would be the primary point of contact with questions that you have is a great thing to do before you get deeper into this process. Also, just want to highlight two important deadlines, one which is a little more urgent than the other, but the letter of intent is due tomorrow, December 3rd. That is a 60-day deadline before your full application is due. I have received a bunch of these already, which is great. If you have not yet submitted yours, that is due by end of day tomorrow. It must be submitted both to the department and then also must be submitted to the district that you're applying to, the authorizer, the local board. And so I just wanted to clarify, if you submitted it to me in email, I always respond back that it's received. But also I will usually send you a reminder that also please submit it to your authorizer. That's really important. And I also want to flag here, because this came up at our office hours 2 weeks ago, some authorizers have different requests for how you submit your letter of intent. So some may only require an electronic copy emailed to the office, which is what we at the department ask for. But some authorizers have requested a paper copy, either mailed or delivered to their district office. So please check with your authorizer all the requirements for your letter of intent and make sure you complete that tomorrow. If you have run into any issues with this or have any questions, I'm hanging around at the end of the presentation anytime that's available at the end of the presentation to answer specific questions for y'all. And then also I'm available the rest of the day, top on the phone or respond to an email if you have any questions. The other deadline to keep in mind is February 1st, and that is the last day that you can submit your completed charter school application. And so I recommend probably not waiting until February 1st. Give yourself a window of time to turn in early if possible. But again, you'll also want to reach out to your authorizer with any specific guidelines they have for how you submit that to their office. We'll talk more broadly about what that looks like in the application, but those 2 dates are important coming up.
And Nate, I wanted to jump on top of that. I urge you all to please, please plan ahead. Don't wait till the last minute. These are hard deadlines. They cannot be extended. If you miss it, you're out for the cycle. So I don't want any of you to be in that position. I urge you, like Nate said, to we confirm when we receive it on our end, but your authorizer also has to. So I urge you to seek confirmation of receipt from them. So you have it both from us and from your authorizer. If there's any reason one or the other doesn't receive it in time, you're not eligible for this cycle. So please, please plan ahead, submit early so there aren't any wrinkles. We've had this happen in the past, and unfortunately, we've had to deny some applicants who missed the deadline. So we don't want that to happen to anybody. All I can say is plan ahead.
Yep, and definitely reach out to us with any questions if we can help. So next I want to talk about where to access the application. It sounds like based on a lot of your scores, you probably have already gotten to the point where you've accessed it and read through it. But if you haven't, or maybe you're thinking of applying, maybe not this year, but next year, and so you're just starting your process, go to our website, the charter school page on the department's website. There's a menu on the left side of that page called Application to Start a New Charter School. And this is where we store everything that you need in order to apply to start your charter school. So at the bottom, there's a section called Required Documents, and there's a number of items listed there, which I have here on the slide. So the first, you can download the document, the letter of intent. The second, that is going to be the bulk of what we look at today, is the charter application. Make sure it's the one that says for schools opening in school year 2023-24. So I want to flag that for you. If you are someone who applied last year and were denied, or you applied in past years, and that there are some updates to the application you want to take a look at, the newest one that's available. In addition, there is a separate link for the budget document, and that's because it's a downloadable Excel document, and that is part of the application as well. There is a link that you can download the application scoring rubric. This is not something that you have to complete as the sponsor, but you certainly can, and I would recommend you should, look at it to see how you will be evaluated by the local board when they're put together a review committee. So you have access to that ahead of time, and that is the document, the standard rubric that authorizers use when evaluating chart applications. And then finally, some documents that may or may not apply to you. The first is the portfolio summary template. So if you are replicating a school, you have other existing schools in Tennessee, then this document is how you list out the schools that you also have currently operating here. So that's not applicable for everyone, and the application tells you when you need to complete that section. And then finally, local supplemental documents. So according to statute, local authorizers, they can add additional supplementary documents. That deadline for them to submit those is November 1st. So the only authorizers this year who submitted supplemental documents are Knox County and Shelby County schools. There are links to both of those on our website, but you can also reach out directly to those authorizers if they have any questions.
Nate, we have a question in the chat. Can we use the portfolio summary if we have charters outside Tennessee?
You absolutely could include list of schools outside of Tennessee. The application will direct you what you need to complete and when, and we'll go over that here in a bit. Once you identify your applicant type, it will list for you the sections that you need to complete. That's a great question. Thank you. Okay. So that's a good segue into what we're going to talk about next, which is what type of applicant are you? So thank you for your question. There are 4 categories of applicants on our application process. And this is important because once you identify the type of applicant you are, there is an additional chart in the application that has an additional column, and it tells you what sections of the application you need to complete. So if you choose the wrong category, then you run the risk of submitting an incomplete application, which can be rejected by the authorizer. So do make sure that you identify the sections that you need to complete and complete each of those. So the 4 categories are number 1, what probably a lot of people fall into, which is the New Start applicant. And this is a sponsor who currently has no operating schools, and they're proposing to start a new school here in Tennessee. So if you're starting out and you have no other schools, then you are considered a New Start applicant. So what you'll notice is that you don't have to complete the 4th component of the application around the portfolio because you don't have any other charter schools to talk about. So that would be an example of why you would want to make sure you're completing the correct section. Moving on, category 2 is for, there's 2 groups that fit into category 2. The first are sponsors who have at least 1 school currently operating in Tennessee, but you're proposing to start a new type of school, either a change in focus or a change in grade structure. So you're not replicating your current school. So an example of this would be if you currently operate a K through 8 school in Tennessee, then you want to open up a high school. That obviously is going to look very different. There are different requirements that come with planning and operating a high school. And so you would be a category 2. You're not just replicating your K-8 model. Or if you have a music focused high school and you want to open up a new high school that's STEM focused, that also would fall under category 2 because the academic focus is different. There'd be different requirements that would be part of your academic plan. And so you would be considered a category 2 in that example. The other type of category 2 sponsor is a sponsor with at least 1 school currently operating outside of Tennessee. And so obviously that you have existing schools you can speak to, they're just not in Tennessee, so you would be a category 2. Category 3, this is for existing Tennessee sponsors who are replicating a school. So you currently operate a K-8 school and you're just creating a new K-8 school, same model, maybe in a different neighborhood or in a different county. You would be a category 3 applicant. And then finally, category 4, those of you who are an existing sponsor in the ASD who's proposing to exit the Achievement School District and transition to your home LEA pursuant to your school exit plan, you would be a category 4. That's a very specific type. So if you're not part of the ASD, then you would not be category 4. It's the easiest way to figure that one out. But before we move on from this, I do have a quick practice for understanding. So go ahead in the chat box, identify which applicant category that you fit into by number. So are you a 1, a 2, a 3, or 4? And then just a brief explanation of why, your evidence to support that. So my example would be if I was currently operating schools in Arkansas, but I have no schools in Tennessee, I would be a 2. I fit that out-of-state sponsor. So you can go ahead and identify your number and your brief reason why. If this doesn't apply to you because you're not a sponsor, you're just here joining the presentation, then you can ignore this, check for understanding.
We've got a lot of 1s, as you expected, Nate. We've got an out-of-stater, category 2.
Great.
Thank you for your responses, everyone.
Appreciate that. So what you'll notice is when you get to your application section, where it's the very first section, the contact information page, the reference page, it will actually ask you to identify the number. So you do have to check the box. If you are uncertain which category you fall into and you just want to double check, then definitely at the end of the presentation or offline through email or phone call, you can reach out and I can help walk you through it. But most of you should be able to figure it out based on that chart that's included in the application. So now that you know where to access the application and you know what applicant type you are, I want to dive a little deeper into the content found within the application itself. So there are 5 kind of buckets of content components of the application. The first is that general information page. This is something that for any of you who've ever applied to anything at our office or a grant, they are very similar format where we're asking that general information of you, your school, your authorizer. So do complete that. Second is the assurances. This is probably one of the easiest sections to complete, but do make sure you read through those assurances and then have an authorized representative of the sponsor sign those. Number 3, this is the largest component of the application by far. This is the application narrative. And we'll talk about a little more of this in a little bit. But this is where you are walking through and answering the questions and creating your academic operations and financial plan of your school. 4 is your projected budget. This is a separate Excel document that you will complete along with budget narrative. And then 5 would be any of your applicable attachments. There's a lot of attachments. Not everyone will have to submit all of the attachments in the list. The budget number 4 and the attachments number 5 do not count towards your page limit, which we'll talk about here in a bit. So the format of the application, there is a 250-page limit. And like I said, that doesn't include your budget and it doesn't include your attachments because your attachments are numerous. And so it's just really the narrative portion that you are writing that counts towards that 250-page limit. Sections 1 through 3, I should say, in the previous slide. In addition, there are specific ways that you need to submit your application that are outlined in the application document. And there's 2 forms that you have to submit your application, both in hard copy form and electronic copy. So first, your hard copies, these are just for your authorizer, the district that you're applying to. The department does not need any hard copies. I work from home and I don't have space to store all of your very large, beautiful applications. But so hard copies go to your authorizers you're applying to, and then do carefully read through what the application states because there are specific things that your hard copy must have. So they must be in a 3-ring binder, have tabs. The binder has to be labeled, the tabs have to be labeled, there needs to be table of contents, page numbers. So do go through and make sure that what you're submitting meets all those requirements. And then also a good opportunity to connect with your authorizer ahead of time and make sure that they haven't added any additional requirements they need for the hard copies. There's also a requirement for an electronic copy. And so the electronic copy is just a PDF document or a electronic version of the exact copy of your hard copy of the application. And so it's going to be obviously a really large document. And that PDF should be submitted and it should include everything. So your application narrative, the budget, and the attachments are all included in one file. And then they also ask for you to submit, in addition, your budget again by itself as an Excel document. And obviously that's just for ease of use. It's really hard to read those budgets when you save them in the PDF. So one document that has everything in the binder is saved as one file. And then again, just submit your budget worksheet as an Excel version. So when you are going to file your application, again, the application is February 1st, and that deadline is to submit it both to the authorizer and to the department. The authorizer can request up to 5 hard copies and 1 electronic copy. So that's an example of something you'll need to reach out and double check what their expectations are there based on who you're applying to. In addition, an authorizer can request an application fee of up to $2,500 per school that you're applying for. So if you are just submitting an application for one school, then they can ask for $2,500. If you are maybe an established network and you're applying for 2 schools at the same time, they could ask for $2,500 for each school. And that fund goes to helping the authorizer with the difficult work of putting together a review committee and thoughtfully and thoroughly going through the applications that you submit. So there is a definite need for those costs, and that's why that they have the application fee there. In addition,
Nate, can you advance the slide?
Thank you, Judy. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And then finally, the authorizer can request supplemental application materials. And as I mentioned before, for this cycle, that's just Shelby County and Knox County that have submitted those additional supplemental applications. So again, authorizer can request up to 5 hard copies, 1 electronic copy, an application fee of up to $2,500 per school that you're submitting an application for. And then if you're submitting an application for Shelby and Knox, do check out their supplemental materials that are posted on our website. When you submit the application to the department, we just need the electronic copy. So now that we know when and how to apply, we can go back and kind of look at each section a little more detailed. So first section is the general information page. So this is a form that you fill out. It's school information, the sponsor's information, a primary contact person who exists right now on your school design team, your status as a charter management organization, if you have any other applications under consideration, and then, like I said earlier, defining what your applicant type is. So this is a pretty brief section to fill out, but you do want to make sure that you've completed it in its entirety. The next section are the assurances. And this section, you just need to carefully review the assurances that are listed, insert the name of your school, and then have the authorized representative from the sponsor sign the assurances. Again, much a quicker section to complete, but important that you have all necessary signatures required. The third component, again, is the bulk of the application narrative. And this will include different sections depending on the applicant type you are. But everyone will submit an executive summary, which is just 1 to 3 pages summarizing the overall argument of your charter school, what it looks like and what purpose it serves. Everyone will complete sections 1, 2, and 3, at least part of each section. So the first is the academic plan, design, and capacity. The second is the operations plan and capacity. And the third is the financial plan and capacity. So each of those sections, it correlates to how we measure performance of charter schools, your performance framework. It always looks at academics, operations, and finances. And the questions get at both what is your plan for your school, and then what is your capacity to successfully execute that plan? And that's how the questions are framed. Each of those sections include multiple subsections. And so an academic plan, each subsection is titled 1.1, 1.2, all the way down. And that's how you would organize these questions. Section 4, not everyone needs to complete this, but if you have other schools already that you operate, this is where you complete the portfolio review and performance record. So we don't have time to go through the entire application because it is robust, but I did want to go ahead and take a look at one example of what you would be looking at, so you get an idea, if you have not already started, what the application entails. So each section has numerous subsections. So here's looking at the very first subsection underneath the academic plan, design, and capacity. And so it's the school mission and vision, which is obviously a really great place to start when you're planning out a school. What is the mission and vision of the school? And then in this particular section, there are 6 A through F subpoints that are all components of the question that you should respond to. And in a moment, we'll take a look at the rubric that will kind of help as you are answering these questions. But this is just one subsection of the application. Each subsection looks different. Sometimes there might be additional questions or fewer questions. There might be a chart you have to fill out. So each will have a different requirement. But to complete the application, just go through each subsection and answer the questions as stated. So for this section, you need to provide a mission statement for your school, describe the vision of the school and how the vision will help achieve your school's mission, describe how the mission and vision of the school will meet the prescribed purposes for charter schools found in statutes, so in Tennessee Code annotated, listed there. And that will require you to look up that list and then make the connection to your mission and vision. You'll describe how the mission and vision of the school address priorities set by your authorizer. Describe what the school will look like when it's achieving its mission, and then finally describe the innovative or unique features of the school or education model. How do these features align with your mission and vision, and how will they foster student achievement and success? So as you can see, if you can go through and answer all those questions thoroughly, then you've really done a nice job of setting up the mission and vision of your school. That is just one component that reviewers will consider as they're looking at your overall academic plan and design and capacity. Once you've completed the narrative section, or you might do the section before, you could do the budget, I guess, first if you wanted to. An additional section you need to complete is the projected budget. So this is a separate document you should download on our website titled the Charter Application Budget Document for School Year 2023-24. And this document is also pretty robust. There's a number of tabs that you need to complete. My recommendation is to start on the first tab, read through all the directions, and work from left to right, because as you start filling out cells in the documents, it automatically populates the subsequent tabs for you. So once you select the year that you're opening your school, it will enter in the years for your year 0, as well as years 1 through 5 for the rest of your document. Once you enter in the enrollment information, it will use that enrollment information to pre-populate the other slides for you, other cells for you, excuse me. And then there are 2 codes that you will look for when you're completing that tab. So if you see a yellow box, and that's where you're inputting directly financial information. You see a green box, that's where you can input assumptions or other information to provide support to the financial information that you're inputting. Everything else pretty much pre-populates or is providing you information for what to consider as you're completing the document.
And those colors are kind of approximate, like the yellow may be kind of a peach or a light pink on your screen, but just so you know that that's where you're supposed to input information.
Correct. And all the directions are included on the first tab of the document as well. Once you complete everything, do review for accuracy. I will say that I've been on review committees in the past, and we've always had financial experts who review these and really do look at the numbers and ensure that things line up and are reasonable. And so we do read this thoroughly, and it's something that committees will look at to as they rate the financial viability of your application. And then finally, this, again, I just want to reiterate, will be submitted as part of the PDF, that one PDF document you submit for your electronic submission. And then this is the Excel document that you also submit by itself, along with the full application document. And then finally, the application attachments, they are requested throughout the narrative. So you will get to a question and sometimes it will say, in attachment A, submit your academic calendar, or it might ask for your discipline, your code of conduct, bylaws for your governing board. So a number of different documents that it will ask for. There are a total of 20 attachments, but you might not be asked to attach all of those. It just depends on your applicant type. There's a list of all of them on page 31, but you'll know which ones you need to include because it will prompt you for them in your narrative. Okay, before we move on to the next sections, I do want to pause here. Were there any questions about anything we've discussed up this point? The application, the components of the application, the different documents, the how to file, how to submit, anything in that realm that I can help you with?
Not seeing any questions, Nate.
Great. Well, since most of you are 3s and higher, I'm not surprised by that, but hopefully this was a good refresher. Okay, so the next section we're going to talk about is once you submit your application, what does that review process look like? And one caveat before I start on this is a lot of these dates are approximations. So the law gives deadlines from the previous submission by which the next thing has to be completed. So if you'll notice on the first 2, those are hard deadlines, but the rest of them have an asterisk because it really just depends on when you're submitting things or when the local board's making a decision. So I do want to clarify that. But the first deadline is tomorrow, December 3rd. That is the date for your letter of intent that is due both to the local board, the authorizer, as well as to the department. That is due 60 days prior to the date of the full application, which is February 1st. Once you submit your application, your completed application to your authorizer, then the first deadline that it sets is the authorizer has 90 days from the receipt of a completed application for its local board to make a ruling on that application. And so that 90 days is the time for them to bring together their review committee, to read through at least your application, potentially others, and then to complete their own rubrics, and then for the review committee to meet and kind of come together on scores. There are other components that might be part of that, such as a capacity interview, a public hearing. There's a lot going on during that 90 days, working up to the point in which a local board then makes a decision and votes on whether or not to approve your application. So potentially at this third point of the timeline, the local board could vote to approve your application, in which case you're done. And so you would then be moving on to the circle, planning to open up and launch your school in August of 2023, unless otherwise specified and approved by your authorizer. The other decision that could be made is that they could deny the application as submitted. And so what is required is if they deny your application, then they must provide a written uh, uh, list of the reasons for why. And then once you receive the written reason why, then you have 30 days as a sponsor from the receipt of reasons for denial to submit an amended application. We can go back and use feedback received and make those changes to resubmit the application to the local Board of Education. Once they received your amended application, then they have an additional 60 days from receipt of that amended application to, again, review the amended application and then make a recommendation to the local board, who then must issue a decision on the amended application by the end of that 60 days. At that point, again, there are two options. The local board could approve your amended application, in which case you're done, congratulations, and you move on to planning the launch of your school in the following fall. Or again, they could deny your amended application. There is an appeals process that we're going to go over in a bit, but we're going to not address that quite yet. But this is kind of the timeline that you're looking at for what a typical timeline for schools who are applying. You will apply in February 1st, and you might not have an approval from your authorizer until late summer. And that's something to keep in mind as you're planning for launching your school. When the authorizer receives your application, they're using that standard rubric that we talked about, and they are assessing each of the subpoints, so 1.1, 1.2, those subsections of your application, and then also awarding an overall score to each of those larger components, so academics, financial, operations, and portfolio. And these are the three scores that you can receive for each of those components. So you're either going to meet or exceed the standard, partially meet the standard, or does not meet the standard. Typically, for a school to or an authorizer to make a recommendation to the board to approve the school, you must meet or exceed all of the components. So academics overall should be meet or exceed, operations overall, finance and portfolio overall should meet or exceed the standard. It does not mean you have to meet or exceed every single substandard. So there are 15 or 17 academic subsections alone. You might have the majority of those that meet or exceed, one or two that maybe partially meet, and so they could still recommend to approve it. But that is what they are. Those are the scores they're using as they're evaluating. Or
Nate, we do have a question.
yeah.
Based on prior denials that indicate a propensity to deny on financial matters, what areas of finance are usually highlighted as top of the list issues?
That's a great question. I can't answer that since I don't have the knowledge of all the different authorizers and how they've denied based on that. One, it might be something to reach out to either the authorizer to see if they can provide you any general feedback that biggest questions that they see from the review committees when they're reviewing financial sections. You might also reach out to charter schools who've gone through the process already to see if they have insights that they can provide you. When I have reviewed what I think the conversation I've heard a lot of is the biggest issues are either the documents aren't realistic, so the numbers that are being used don't really show enough financials being allocated for, especially that planning year. So when they're looking for financial viability, they want to see both in that first planning year, are there enough funds and where are the funds coming from to help launch the school? And then is there a plan within the first 5 years to become financially viable institution as well? So they're really looking at, do the numbers add up? Are they missing things? If you don't buy any student desks, that's obviously a red flag. And so there might be that there's something missing from the budget. The numbers you're using aren't reliable or realistic. Are probably the biggest things that we look at. From there, where are your revenues coming from? You will obviously have BEP funding, state funding once your school opens, but pay special attention to that gap between when you first receive your BEP and when you're starting the work of launching your school, because where will that funding come from? I think is probably a big sticking point that I've seen in the past. That's a great question, but again, that's just one insight I can provide. I'm not going to be on a review committee reviewing these, so I can't tell you for the authorizer who you're applying to what they might be looking at.
Yeah, and I'll just emphasize what Nate said. I think the focus is on viability and financial viability and sustainability, as well as what other sources besides state and federal funding do you have for funding for your school? What donors, what community partners, like where is that funding coming from? It should not be just reliant on federal and state dollars, especially because of that gap year, but overall in general. So those are some of the points that I would highlight.
That's great. Thank you, Judy. So once they start looking at your application, they will use the rubric document that we shared with you to go through and score each of these subsections. So earlier we looked at 1.1 school mission and vision, the narrative questions. Now I want to take a look at that same section, but what it looks like in the rubric. So it lists the characteristics of a strong response. The first is that the mission statement is clear, concise, compelling, and measurable. Second, the applicant clearly links the mission and vision to at least 3 of the purposes of charter schools found in Tennessee Code Annotated. When achieving its mission, the school, as described by the applicant, will offer a strong curriculum and a range of opportunities to all students and will close achievement gaps. And then finally, the innovations described by the applicant are supported by evidence of success. So when a reviewer is looking at your application from the authorizer, they have this as their guide for how they will assess your narrative for the school mission and vision. And then they have the 3 options just to get the bottom. They can score this does not meet, partially meets, and meets. Now, on the template they use, they're obviously going to be adding notes and information. They're not just scoring it and moving on. They do provide rationale for why they're scoring that. But obviously, having this tool to look at as you're writing it or after you're done writing it to kind of assess yourself and the strength of your application is really useful. Another example is found here for the school finance plan. Since that was a question that was just asked, it's really great. Here's what you can see what they're looking at for that exact question that you mentioned. So here, there's also an example where they're asking for 2 attachments to be completed. Attachment N, which is the budget worksheet, and then attachment O, the budget narrative. So obviously, if you're missing one of those attachments, that would be a major issue for when they're scoring it. But you can also look at the other words that they're using. So in that very first bullet point, they're saying the budget worksheet contains reasonable assumptions and budget numbers that reflect all startup expenses. And again, I think that startup year 0 budget is challenging because you don't yet have your BEP yet. So I think that's probably an area to pay special attention to. The second bullet says the applicant identifies financial procedures, policies, and systems and processes for accounting, payroll, and independent annual audit. So they're really looking for an applicant who's thought through all of those components of what it takes to financially operate a school. And then I won't read the rest of them, but you can see that there are a number of bullets under this financial section in general that they're looking for to rate it as a strong response. So I do want to stop and pause before we move on to the end of our presentation here. Another quick practice check for understanding here. So now that we've seen an application section, the school mission and vision, and then we've also seen the rubric that goes along with it, I want to take a moment to put into the chat box an example of how you could use the rubric to strengthen the response that you provide in the narrative. I apologize for how small and blurry the narrative is. It's hard to cram everything on this slide. But how could you use the rubric to help you in your response to the narrative response? I'm not asking you to actually answer the narrative. Don't tell me what your mission is necessarily, but what tidbits can you pull out of the rubric that would help make sure that you are scoring meets or exceed on your narrative? Go ahead and pop an example or an idea you have into the chat box. I'll give you a moment to kind of look at that. And if someone steals your answer, feel free to enter it again. Yep, I see someone saying to use the rubric to go back and self-assess and revise your draft. That's a great idea. Jay's having board members review sections with the rubrics as if they are reviewers. It's an excellent idea. Have a fresh set of eyes. And board members are a great example too, because if you were leaning on their expertise, they could review different sections of your application, not necessarily have to review the entire application. It's great. Any other examples? So one that I want to throw out there, because this one to me always, I think, is really crucial when I read it. So in the second bullet point of the rubric, it says the applicant clearly links the mission and vision to at least 3 of the purposes for charter schools found in TCA. And so I think that's really important, because if you uh, read the narrative response and you didn't read the rubric, you might see there's one purpose written in the state statute that you were like, yes, this purpose resonates with me and what I want to do for our charter school. And you write a really great response, but you're only responding to one of the items in state statute. Then a reviewer could look at that and say, well, the rubric clearly says they need 3, they only did 1, and say it's partially meets. And so I think that's something that if you hadn't looked at the rubric, it would be a really easy error to make. And it's not because you didn't write a good application, but the reviewer is given a standard by which they have to use, and you did not meet that standard. So I think that's a really good example of the rubric provides additional evidence that might not be in the narrative. Um, and so I would definitely use that as you're going through the self-assess and see maybe where there are gaps in your response. That fourth bullet two is another example where you're supporting your innovations with evidence of success. What evidence can you say? Like, not just that I like this model, but how do we know that this model will work, and how will this model work for the population that you are hoping to serve? So why this model for these students in this community is also something. Any questions about the review process before we move on? And
There's
thank you, Mecca, for your
nothing new.
response too. I saw Mecca kind of hit on what I was talking about, which is specifically responding to the prompts using the rubric. Thank you. I'm sorry, Judy, do you have a comment?
No, no new comments or questions.
Great. Okay. Well, we're nearing the end of our time here, and we're almost done with our slides as well, but I'll keep moving on because there'll be additional time for questions at the end. We're just going to briefly touch on the appeals process because there's a chance that this might not apply to you. You could get approved on the first or second read from your local board, in which case we don't need to spend too much time on it now. But the other reason is because the commission is really on top of reaching out to folks when they know that they might have an opportunity to appeal, and they will provide all the information you need when you need it. So I just want to highlight what they will look like, but know that if you get to the point where you do need to appeal, the commission will be a really great resource to help you through that process. So first, the appeals process is for charter applications that were denied by the local board of education, and it both denied in the first submission and your admitted application. So if your admitted application is denied by the local board of education, they provide you the reasons why, then you are able to appeal that decision to the commission. And the sponsor is responsible for emailing that notice of appeal within 10 calendar days of when the decision is made by the local board. The notice of appeal does require a number of items. It's not just an email saying, I want to appeal this. You also need to have copies of your initial and amended applications, summary of the application timeline. So kind of going back to that slide, what are the key dates of when everything was submitted? And that's really looking at, did this application process follow the procedures that are outlined in statute? Copy of the letter from the local board that's informing you of the reasons for denial. Ensure that you have a clean version of the amended application, so one that doesn't have any redlining on it. And then finally, a brief statement for why the decision was contrary to the best interests of the students, LEA, which is a district, or community. And that is in quotation because that is really the standard by which the commission must review any appeal to determine whether or not they will uphold a decision made by the local board or overturn that decision. So you should be able to articulate why you feel that the local board decision was contrary to the best interests of students, LA, or community, because that would be the way that the commission would be able to say, we agree and we would grant you your charter application. Once the commission receives your notice of appeal, they also in statute have 75 calendar days to respond and have the commission make a decision on whether or not to uphold the local decision or to overturn that decision. And so it looks kind of like this on the timeline. Again, these dates are all approximate because it really depends on when your local board issues your denial for your amended application. But essentially, once they issue your denial on your amended application, you have 10 calendar days to submit your notice of appeal to the commission. And then once the commission receives it, they also go through a robust process to review these. That includes a de novo review of all application materials. They conduct capacity hearings and a public hearing, really going through and collecting all the data. It was a fresh start to be able to, as a committee, make a recommendation to the executive director. Once the executive director receives that data, then she issues written findings and makes her own recommendation to the commission. The commission is not bound by the recommendation of the executive director, but they will receive both of those reports, and then they will vote and make a decision on the appeal. So it's likely that, depending on when your timeline is for initial submission of your application, October would be kind of the latest, typically where a school would have a decision made by the commission on our current timeline. So at that point, there are two decisions that can be made. The commission could decide that the decision by the local board was contrary to the best interest of students, the LEA, and the community, in which case they would overturn the decision, and that would then approve the application to then be opened in the following fall, August 2023. Or the commission could decide that the local board's decision was not contrary and would uphold the decision, and that would end your process for that calendar year. There is no additional appeal or resubmission at that point. If you are denied at that point, you are certainly able to reapply the next year or in the future after you made changes to your application to reflect any deficiencies that were there. But at that point, that would be the end of this cycle of application.
And I just wanted to add, so you can see from this timeline why this is a 1.5-year process, because here, if you get approved on appeal, it's in October, before less than a year before you're opening your doors. And that's why we have the timeframes that we do, and why you're submitting applications now for 23-24 and not 22-23.
Exactly. Great. Questions here on appeals or anything else we talked about before we wrap up our presentation today?
There's nothing more in the chat.
Okay. So probably one of the most important things that people want me to talk about, if you are more familiar with the process, is what has changed from last year that I should be aware of. So I think most of you are aware at this point, but the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission, a newer state agency, they have taken over the appeals process. So if you applied in past years and went through the State Board of Education, they no longer oversee the appeals process. That is through the commission. So you can access their website. They have their own set of commission rules that you should review for the charter application and appeals process. Both of them are linked here, but just wanted to highlight that change. And then these next two slides are just a summary of what has been modified or changed from last year's application. There's not a lot of changes. I want to clarify, there's nothing monumentally different, but I do want to point them out so that they're easier to find. So in general, both for the application and the rubric, we always annually do a review just to check for simple things, editing, grammar, spelling, and formatting, as well as just continued alignment with state statute and rules. So we always look for those things and look for when can we clarify language to make it easier to understand or address questions or concerns that may have come up through the process. So there might be some rewording of things that don't change the meaning or the content itself, but have been rewritten to be clearer. The first revision that I want to point out is if you are a Category 4 applicant, so you are an ASD school applying to exit, there is additional required subsections that are listed in that chart for you. So see the table on page 5 and the corresponding checklist. There are additional sections that weren't required in previous years that you do need to address. The second one applies to everyone because it's in section 1. but there's a small revision under 1.4, the academic performance standards, subpoint D. The question reads, describe the proposed school's approach to helping remediate students' academic underperformance and learning loss, including plans for RTI that aligns with Tennessee guidelines. So that underlined portion is the part that was added. So I just wanted to flag that for you. And then finally, there is one new subsection or subpoint of a subsection. 2.4 personnel human capital, letter E is a new question. How will you ensure that teachers are licensed and endorsed in their content areas? Then on the rubric, the only real change that we wanted to mention here was we just wanted to provide additional clarity, and we will continue to provide additional clarity and guidance on how to use the scoring system on the rubric. And so we wanted to make it clear that when you are coming up when, I should say when the authorizers are determining the overall score of a section, how they are able to do that, interpret that. And so that is what was changed. So it doesn't really impact sponsors applying, but more is just additional guidance for authorizers as they kind of calibrate their review committees on how to score sections.
Nate, we have a question. Do you suggest adding any COVID-19 protocols in the charter application? If so, in any specific areas like facilities or instruction?
Sure, you certainly are able to address those. They are not, if they're not asked for, you would not be counted against it for not including them. However, I think that would be wise as we look forward and not knowing when we can kind of move past having this be a concern for schools. It would be, I think, wise to think through that anyway. And so the operations section, there's kind of a catch-all section in that, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, where it's kind of like other policies. And so you could potentially add COVID protocols there. I think would be a good section if you wanted to have those on your own. Might be something that is determined by your page limit and how close you are to maxing it out, and whether or not that's something you can include. But certainly, if you're opening a school during this time, that's something you want to keep in mind. Thanks for your question.
Yeah, and it might also fall out under, as she suggested, facilities because of spacing, social distancing,
Yep.
traffic flow through the school. I mean, so you can address it however you feel best. It makes the most sense.
Absolutely. And it might be something you just weave throughout your application as well. So as you're looking at facilities and thinking about how facilities might need better airflow than in the past, or wider hallways, or whatever it is to make it safer for students and teachers, but also in your academic plan, really thinking through the students that you are acquiring and acknowledging any learning deficits that resulted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021. Those gaps will continue to persist with students. And so certainly even in 2023-24, as you're opening a school, acknowledging those in your academic plan potentially. Okay. Any other questions on the application and changes and updates?
I'm not seeing any new questions.
Okay. Well, I have two requests before we wrap up here. The first is in the chat box, if you can answer one of these questions. So one is, what is one piece of information or insight you learned today that will help you in completing your application? Two, what is one action item that you have either added to your to-do list or reprioritized after attending the webinar? Or three, if you're a returning sponsor, what is a piece of advice that you can share with first-time applicants? So an exit ticket. Once you've done that, I will also ask you to hang on for just another minute. I'm going to put on a slide with a survey. And I would love your feedback as we continue to improve our webinars and communication to you all. There's a QR code you can scan with using the camera function on your phone. And just a brief survey that we do review and use that data. I would appreciate that. I see a lot of using the rubric.
Flip the screen?
Yeah.
To the QR code.
I see a lot of people as they're in their exit ticket, they are going to be using the rubric more thoroughly, which I'm glad to hear. Advice, add as many COVID protocols as possible, pull from what current schools are using. That's a great idea. use the resources. In education, we always steal and copy ideas from people who are doing it well and implementing that into our own schools. Someone mentioned that they learned the specific updates to the charter application. I'm glad that was helpful.
Reaching out to the local authorizer, that's great.
Yep, absolutely.
Plan for teacher certification. Great. This is great feedback, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I have the QR code up there. Again, if you've not used one of these before, you just can open up the camera function on your phone and hover over it. And then it will usually prompt you with a link you can click on, and it will take you to the website. Or if you have a QR reader app, you can use that. Real brief, and again, we appreciate that feedback. The next slide is my contact information. This presentation has been recorded. I will be sharing it out as well as posting it on our website along with the PowerPoint. So you have access to that information moving forward. But I also have some time here to hang back. If anyone has questions that they want to ask me at this time, I will be here for a few more minutes.
And please be patient with our posting. We have to go through a process to get it approved before we can post it, actually. So it'll take a few days, but we will be posting the recording and the presentation. Thank you all for your participation and for your chat engagement. Appreciate it very much. You should always feel free to reach out to Nate or myself with any questions as you go through this process. We understand it takes a lot of time and effort, and it is critical work. And so we want to support you however we can.
And best of luck to you all moving forward. This is a long process. It's a lot of work. And so I just appreciate the time and effort that you all and resources that you all are putting into this to provide great educational opportunities for our kiddos throughout the state. So thank you in advance for your time and effort on this process. That is it. So if you are done and you have no questions and you've provided the survey, you are free to exit out of here. If you have a question, you can hang back, and I'll feel free to connect with you on any questions you have. Have a great day.